The handcuffs were too tight, biting into his wrists with a cold metallic malice that mirrored the sneer on Officer Quentin Holt's face. To everyone in the packed, suffocating courtroom, Harlan Voss looked like just another statistic. Another man in an orange jumpsuit about to be railroaded by a system designed to crush him. The prosecutor smirked. The judge checked his watch. In the gallery whispered in judgment. They thought they had him cornered. They thought he was powerless. But they didn't know that the evidence they were planting was being recorded by the very man they were trying to destroy. They didn't know that the man in chains wasn't a criminal. He was their worst nightmare, and in his pocket sat a badge that would turn this courtroom into a crime scene. The humid air of the Louisiana bayou seemed to cling to the walls of the small interrogation room, but the real heat was coming from the two men standing over Harlan Voss. He sat perfectly still, his posture upright despite the uncomfortable metal chair bolted to the floor. He was dressed in a tattered gray hoodie and jeans, his feet clad in worn-out sneakers. To the untrained eye, he looked like a drifter, perhaps a man down on his luck who had taken a wrong turn off the interstate. But his eyes, sharp, observant, and dangerously calm, told a different story. "You listen to me, boy," Officer Quentin Holt growled, slamming a heavy hand onto the steel table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small room. "We found the drugs in your trunk. We have the witness statements. You were speeding, you resisted arrest, and you assaulted an officer. That's 20 years easy, unless you sign this confession right now." Harlan looked at the confession. It was a poorly typed document riddled with errors, but legally binding enough to ruin a life. It stated that he, Harlan Voss, had knowingly transported 3 kilos of cocaine across state lines. "I didn't have any drugs," Harlan said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "And I certainly didn't assault anyone. You pulled me over for a broken taillight that wasn't broken until you smashed it with your baton." The other officer, a younger, wire-thin man named Officer Shane Miller, let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "He's a lawyer now, Holt. Look at him, thinks he knows the law." Holt leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale tobacco and coffee. "I am the law in this parish, son. Judge Preston Hale plays golf with my daddy. The prosecutor, Mr. Victor Lang, he's my brother-in-law. You think anyone is going to believe a stranger like you over 2 decorated officers? You're nobody. You're a ghost." Harlan held Holt's gaze. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. "Everyone is somebody," he said softly. "Smart mouth," Holt spat. He turned to Miller. "Book him. No bail. Throw him in the hole until the arraignment. Let him stew. He'll be begging to sign by morning." As they dragged him out, Harlan didn't struggle. He allowed them to fingerprint him, to shove him into a cold, damp holding cell that smelled of mildew and despair. He sat on the thin cot, listening to the distant shouts of other inmates. What Holt and Miller didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that the cocaine they claimed to find didn't exist. They had planted a bag of powdered sugar and baking soda, a prop they used to shake down out-of-towners for bribe money. Usually the victim would pay a few thousand in cash to make the charges go away. It was a classic shakedown operation, one that had been bleeding the county dry for years. But Harlan wasn't a tourist. He wasn't a drifter. He was Special Agent Harlan Voss of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, working undercover for Operation Blue Swamp. He had spent months building the cover of a wandering laborer. He had rigged his beat-up sedan with 4 high-definition micro cameras and audio recorders. Every word Holt had said, every threat, every lie about the taillight, it was all uploaded to a secure cloud server the moment the patrol car entered the precinct's Wi-Fi range. Harlan lay back on the cot and closed his eyes. He wasn't afraid. He was calculating. The local police thought they were the predators. They had no idea they had just locked themselves in a cage with the lion. The courtroom the next morning was a theater of the absurd. The air conditioning was broken and ceiling fans swirled lazily overhead, doing little to combat the stifling heat. The gallery was packed, mostly with locals who treated court proceedings like a spectator sport. Judge Preston Hale sat on the bench, a massive man with a face like a bulldog and a reputation for maximum sentences. He wiped sweat from his brow with a handkerchief and glared down at Harlan over his spectacles. "Case number, State versus Harlan Voss," the bailiff announced. "Charges, drug trafficking, assault on a police officer, resisting arrest." Prosecutor Victor Lang stood up. He was a slick man in a suit that cost more than Harlan's cover car. He buttoned his jacket with an air of practiced arrogance. "Your Honor," Lang began, his voice dripping with false concern, The state intends to prove that this defendant is a danger to our community, a transient with no ties to this county, caught with a significant amount of narcotics. We have the testimony of two brave officers who risked their lives to apprehend him. Harlan stood in the defendant's box, his hands cuffed in front of him. He had refused the public defender, choosing to represent himself. This had only amused Judge Hale. "Mr. Voss," Judge Hale boomed, "you have refused counsel. Do you understand the gravity of these charges?" Prosecutor Lang is not known for his mercy. "I understand, Your Honor," Harlan said calmly. "I would like to request the dash cam footage from Officer Holt's patrol car be entered into evidence." The courtroom went silent. Lang chuckled, shaking his head. "Your Honor, we've already informed the defendant the dash cam was malfunctioning at the time of the arrest. Technical glitch. Convenient for the criminal, but we have the officer's sworn testimony." "Convenient indeed," Hale sneered. "Motion denied. We don't need videos when we have the word of law enforcement." Harlan didn't react. He expected this. "I see. And the body cams?" "Batteries died," Lang said quickly. "Budget cuts. You know how it is." "Of course," Harlan said. He looked around the courtroom. He saw Holt and Miller sitting in the front row, smirking at him. They looked relaxed, confident. They had done this 100 times before. "Very well," Harlan said. "I would like to call Officer Holt to the stand." Holt stood up, adjusting his belt, and swaggered to the witness stand. He swore on the Bible, looking pious and solemn. "Officer Holt," Lang asked, leading the witness, "tell the court what happened." "Well, sir," Holt drawled, playing to the crowd, "we saw the suspect swerving, suspected DUI. When we lit him up, he tried to run. We pit maneuvered him safely. When I approached the vehicle, he lunged at me, tried to grab my service weapon. I had to subdue him. That's when we found the bricks in the trunk." The jury, mostly handpicked friends of the court, gasped on cue. "He tried to grab your weapon?" Lang asked, feigning shock. "Yes, sir. He was screaming about how he hated cops, said he'd kill us all." Harlan watched the performance with detached curiosity. It was almost impressive how easily the lies rolled off Holt's tongue. "Your witness," Lang said, sitting down with a satisfied smile. Harlan walked towards the stand. The chains on his ankles clanked loudly. "Officer Holt," Harlan began, his voice polite, "you say I was swerving all over the road and I lunged at you like a wild animal. And the dash cam, the body cams, and the GPS log of your vehicle, all of them just happened to fail at that exact moment." "Technology ain't perfect, son," Holt smiled. "Unlike the truth." "The truth," Harlan repeated. "Interesting word. Tell me, Officer Holt, do you recognize the name Red River Logistics?" Holt's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His eyes darted to Lang, then back to Harlan. "Never heard of it." "Really?" Harlan pressed. "Because Red River Logistics is the shell company that wires $5,000 into your personal bank account every month. The same company that is registered to a post office box owned by Prosecutor Lang." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Lang jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is making wild, slanderous accusations. This is irrelevant." "Sustained," Judge Hale roared, his face turning red. "Mr. Voss, you will restrict your questions to the events of the arrest. One more outburst like that, and I will hold you in contempt." "It goes to credibility, Your Honor," Harlan said calmly. "If the officer is on the payroll of a drug distribution ring, his testimony about finding drugs in my car becomes highly suspect." "That is enough," Hale slammed his gavel. "Bailiff, gag the defendant if you have to. We will not have this court turned into a circus." Holt regained his composure, leaning back in the chair. "He's desperate, Judge, just making up stories." Harlan looked at the judge, then at the prosecutor, and finally at Holt. The trap was set. They had just committed perjury and obstruction of justice on the record. "I have no further questions for this witness," Harlan said. "But I do have one piece of evidence I would like to submit. Since the state's cameras were broken, I'd like to submit the footage from my own." Lang laughed out loud. "Your own? We searched you. You didn't have a camera. You didn't even have a phone." "I wasn't talking about a phone," Harlan said, reaching into his pocket. The bailiff stepped forward to stop him, hand on his gun, but Harlan moved slowly, deliberately. He pulled out a small black flash drive. "This drive," Harlan announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room, "contains 4 angles of video from inside and outside my vehicle. It shows I was driving perfectly straight. It shows Officer Holt smashing my taillight with his baton. It records the conversation where he demands $3,000 in cash to let me go. And most importantly, it records him admitting that the drugs were baking soda." Lang's face went pale. The smirk vanished from Holt's face. "I object," Lang screamed, his voice cracking. We cannot verify the authenticity of this surprise evidence. It wasn't entered in discovery. That's because you denied me discovery, Harlan countered. And under the federal rules of evidence, rebuttal evidence to impeach a witness's credibility is admissible without prior notice when perjury is suspected. Judge Hale looked nervous now. He looked at the flash drive like it was a bomb. I will not allow unauthorized electronics in my courtroom. Motion denied. I figured you might say that, Harlan said. He turned to face the gallery, looking directly at a woman in the back row wearing a gray business suit. She had been sitting quietly the entire time. Agent Ellison, Harlan said clearly, did you get that? The woman stood up. The air in the room shifted instantly. She wasn't a local. She radiated authority. I did, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. Who are you? Judge Hale demanded. Sit down or I'll have you arrested. The woman walked into the aisle. She didn't look at the judge. She looked at Harlan. Special Agent Sarah Ellison, FBI. The feed from inside this courtroom has been live-streamed to the New Orleans field office. And, she added, holding up her badge, the gold shield catching the light like a beacon of impending doom for everyone at the prosecutor's table, we have the warrant. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and terrifying. The silence that had gripped the courtroom shattered like glass dropped on concrete. It didn't break into chaos immediately. First, it broke into a confused, terrified murmur that rippled through the gallery. The people of the parish had lived under the thumb of Judge Hale and the Lang family for years. They had seen men dragged away for less than a glare. To see a woman, an outsider, stand up and declare federal authority over their terrifying kingpin was something their minds struggled to process. Judge Hale, however, processed it with the rage of a tyrant facing a coup. His face, already flushed from the heat, turned a dangerous shade of purple. He rose from his leather chair, his black robes billowing like the wings of a vulture. Bailiff! Hale screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. Seize that woman! Seize the defendant! This is a court of law, not a theater for federal theatrics. I will have order. I want them both in holding cells immediately. The two bailiffs, massive men who had spent their careers bullying teenagers and enforcing Hale's will, looked between the judge and Agent Sarah Ellison. They hesitated. In their world, Hale was God. But the badge shining in Ellison's hand represented a power far greater and far more dangerous than a parish judge. If you touch me, Ellison said, her voice calm, level, and piercingly loud, you will be charged with assaulting a federal agent and obstruction of justice in an ongoing RICO investigation. Step back. The bailiffs froze. They looked at Holt in the witness stand for guidance, but Holt was paralyzed. The arrogance that had defined him just moments ago had evaporated, replaced by the pallid, sweaty look of a trapped animal. Harlan Voss, still standing in the defendant's box, finally moved. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't cower. He lifted his cuffed hands and looked directly at the bailiff nearest to him, a man named Deputy Carter. Uncuff me, Carter, Harlan said. It wasn't a request. It was an order given with the weight of someone who commanded respect. Don't you do it, Carter, Prosecutor Lang shrieked. He was scrambling to gather his papers, his hands shaking so violently that files were spilling onto the floor. He is a criminal, a drug trafficker. This is a trick. It's over, Lang, Harlan said, his voice dropping the rough Bayou accent he had faked for months and returning to the crisp, articulate tone of a senior agent. The trick is done. We have your bank records. We have the wiretaps on your office phone. We know about the kickbacks from the private prison construction. We know about the confiscated cash that disappears from the evidence locker. Lang's eyes went wide. He looked at the gallery, seeing the faces of the voters, the people he had fooled. He saw confusion turning into anger. Lies, Lang yelled, pointing a trembling finger. You have no jurisdiction here. This is a state matter. Civil rights violations are a federal matter, Ellison announced, stepping through the swinging gate that separated the gallery from the court floor. She moved with the precision of a predator closing in. Conspiracy to commit fraud is a federal matter, and when you utilize the United States Postal Service to mail fraudulent summonses to extort money from tourists, that becomes mail fraud. That's federal too. Ellison reached the defense table and placed a heavy document on the wood. This is a federal warrant signed by a U.S. magistrate judge in New Orleans this morning. It supersedes your authority, Judge Hale. You are no longer in control of this courtroom. You are a subject of this investigation. Hale slumped back into his chair, the fight draining out of him. He looked at the exit, his eyes darting to the side door behind the bench, his private escape route. Don't even think about it, Harlan warned, reading the judge's body language perfectly. We have agents at the back door. We have agents in the lobby. We have agents securing your records room right now. Holt, realizing the ship was sinking, suddenly stood up in the witness box. Now hold on, he stammered, holding his hands up in a surrender motion. I just did what I was told. I'm just a patrolman. Whatever Lang and the judge were doing with the money, I didn't know the scope of it. I was just following orders. A gasp went through the room. The betrayal was instant. You coward, Lang hissed, turning on his brother-in-law. You're the one who planted the sugar. You told me he was a nobody. You told me he was an easy mark. Because you told me we needed $5,000 by Friday to pay off the zoning inspector. Holt shouted back, forgetting the microphones were still live. Harlan smiled, a cold, hard expression. And there it is, he said to the courtroom. The circular firing squad. Harlan turned to Deputy Carter again, extending his wrists. The cuffs, now. Carter looked at the judge, who was now staring blankly at the ceiling, then at Lang, who was hyperventilating. He looked at Holt, who was trying to cut a deal with the air. Carter made a choice. He reached for his keys and unlocked the handcuffs. The metal clattered to the floor. Harlan rubbed his wrists, the red marks of the tight steel vivid against his skin. He didn't flee. He didn't attack. He simply reached into his pocket, the one they hadn't searched thoroughly enough because they were too arrogant, and pulled out his own badge, clipping it onto his belt. Secure the doors, Harlan ordered the bailiffs. No one leaves. We're going to watch a movie. He walked over to the prosecutor's table, looming over the terrified Lang. You said you couldn't play my video because of a technical glitch. Right move. Lang scrambled out of his chair, nearly tripping over his own feet to get away from Harlan. Harlan took the seat, plugged his flash drive into the court's presentation laptop, and tapped a few keys. The large projection screen that descended from the ceiling, usually used to show diagrams of traffic accidents, flickered to life. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Harlan said, turning to the 12 stunned citizens who had been ready to convict him minutes earlier. You were told I was a dangerous criminal who attacked a police officer. You were told I was swerving. You were told I had cocaine. He hit the spacebar. Let's see what really happened. The courtroom lights dimmed automatically as the projector beamed a high-definition image onto the screen. The quality was crystal clear, far superior to the grainy dashcam footage the police usually provided. The video showed a long, straight stretch of highway through the bayou. The car was traveling at exactly the speed limit. The lane discipline was perfect. There was no swerving. The audio inside the car was quiet, save for the hum of the engine and the soft static of a radio news broadcast. Then blue and red lights flashed in the rear window. Here we go, Harlan's voice on the recording said calmly. Subject is engaging. The car pulled over smoothly. The video switched to a side view, a camera hidden in the doorframe pointing directly at the driver's window. Officer Quentin Holt appeared on screen. In the courtroom, the real Holt put his head in his hands, unable to watch. On screen, Holt didn't ask for license and registration. He walked up, baton already in hand, and smashed the left taillight. The sound of crunching plastic echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Whoops, the on-screen Holt laughed. Looks like you got a broken taillight, boy. That's a safety violation. Step out. The audience in the gallery murmured angrily. They had all been pulled over for broken taillights before. They were seeing their own nightmares played out on screen. The video continued. Harlan stepped out, hands raised, compliant. I haven't done anything wrong, officer, the recorded Harlan said. You're breathing in my county, Holt sneered. That's wrong enough. The angle switched to a button camera on Harlan's chest. It showed a close-up of Officer Shane Miller searching the trunk. Miller held up a bag of white powder that he had pulled from his own pocket, not the car. Jackpot, Holt, Miller yelled. Looks like 3 kilos of pure snow. The on-screen Harlan didn't panic. That's baking soda. I saw you take it from your vest. Holt moved in close to the camera. His face filled the screen. Every pore, every drop of sweat visible in high definition. Listen to me, Holt whispered, his voice booming through the courtroom speakers. I don't care if it's baking soda. I don't care if it's baby powder. Judge Hale doesn't care either. He'll sign the warrant. Lang will prosecute and you'll do 20 years. Unless, Harlan asked, unless you have $3,000 cash on you right now. Consider it a processing fee. We take the cash, you take your baking soda, and you drive away. Simple. I don't have that kind of money, Harlan said. Holt sighed, looking disappointed. Shame, I really wanted to buy a new boat this weekend. Cuff him, Miller, and rough him up a bit. Make it look like he resisted. Lang likes it better when they have bruises. Makes the jury hate him more. The video showed Miller shoving Harlan into the hood of the car. It showed Holt throwing a punch into Harlan's ribs while Harlan stood perfectly still, letting it happen. Harlan paused the video. The frame froze on Holt's fist connecting with his side, a grotesque portrait of police brutality. Harlan turned to the jury. He said, Lang likes it better when they have bruises. He said, Judge Hale doesn't care. This wasn't an arrest, it was a robbery. And it wasn't the first time, was it? He looked at the gallery. How many of you have paid this processing fee? How many of your sons are sitting in prison right now because they couldn't pay? An old woman in the second row stood up. Her hands were shaking. My boy, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. They took my boy 2 years ago. Said he had meth. He never touched drugs in his life. We paid them $5,000 and they still sent him away. Sit down, Hale roared, banging his gavel. This is hearsay. I will clear this court. You will sit down, Agent Ellison shouted, her voice thundering. She marched up the steps of the bench, flanked by 2 other agents who had just entered from the rear door, wearing FBI windbreakers and carrying tactical gear. Ellison stood next to the judge's chair. Judge Hale, step away from the bench. You can't do this, Hale sputtered, clutching his gavel like a lifeline. I am an elected official. You are a racketeer, Ellison corrected, and you are under arrest. The image of the FBI agent pulling the judge out of his high chair was something no one in that room would ever forget. The symbol of their oppression was being manhandled like a common drunk. Down on the floor, Lang tried to make a run for it. He bolted toward the side exit, pushing past a stunned stenographer. Stop him, someone from the gallery shouted. But Harlan was already there. He didn't run. He just took 2 long strides and kicked the rolling office chair into Lang's path. The prosecutor tripped, crashing face first into the carpet. Before he could scramble up, Harlan's foot was on his back, pinning him to the floor. Going somewhere, Mr. Lang? Harlan asked coldly. We haven't even discussed the money laundering yet, or the offshore accounts, or the fact that you've been betting against your own cases in an illegal gambling ring. Harlan looked down at the man who had tried to ruin his life for a few $1,000s. You wanted to put me in a cage, he said, leaning down. Now you're going to see what it's like from the inside. But unlike you, I'll make sure you get a fair trial. I want the world to see exactly who you are. He looked up at the bailiff, Carter, who was standing there with the handcuffs he had just taken off Harlan. Carter, Harlan said, do your job. Carter hesitated for only a second. Then, with a look of grim satisfaction, he walked over, pulled Lang's hands behind his back, and snapped the cuffs on. You have the right to remain silent, Carter said, reciting the words he had said 1,000 times. But this time he smiled. Though I really hope you don't. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't just noise. It was a release of years of tension. People were cheering, crying, hugging each other. The old woman who had spoken earlier was sobbing into her hands, but they were tears of vindication. But Harlan knew it wasn't over. This was just the takedown. The hard part, the unraveling of the entire web, was just beginning. And there was one more player in this game who hadn't shown his face yet. The man who gave Hale his orders. As the agents led Hale, Lang, and the weeping Holt and Miller out of the courtroom, Harlan walked over to the defense table and picked up his file. He looked at Agent Ellison. Did we get the governor? Harlan asked quietly. Ellison shook her head grimly. Not yet. He's claiming ignorance. He says Hale was a rogue actor. Harlan looked at the camera lens in the corner of the room, the one that had been broadcasting everything. He can claim whatever he wants, Harlan said, but I have one more flash drive, and I think it's time we paid the governor's mansion a visit. The drama in the courtroom had ended, but the war for the state was just starting. The fallout from the parish courthouse didn't just make the local news. It exploded across the national consciousness. Within hours, the footage of Officer Holt planting baking soda and Prosecutor Lang fleeing like a frightened rat was trending on every social media platform. The hashtag baking soda justice was garnering millions of views. But for Special Agent Harlan Voss, the viral fame was a tactical nightmare. He had blown his cover to save the innocent people in that courtroom. But in doing so, he had alerted the head of the snake that the hunters were coming. Governor Harlan Whitaker sat in his office in the Capitol, a room that smelled of old mahogany and expensive cigars. He wasn't panic-stricken like Lang or Hale. He was a man who had survived scandals before. He was currently watching the news on a flat-screen television hidden behind a fake oil painting. Rogue agents, Whitaker muttered to his chief of staff, a cold woman named Lydia. That's the narrative. Hale was senile. Lang was greedy. I had no knowledge. We are shocked and appalled. Draft the statement. Sir, Lydia said, her voice tight, the FBI isn't buying it. Agent Ellison has already subpoenaed the state's darker financial records. And that man, Harlan Voss, he's not just an agent. He's from the Public Corruption Unit. He's the one who took down the cartel in Chicago last year. He doesn't stop. Whitaker took a sip of amber liquid from a crystal glass. Everyone stops, Lydia. They stop when they hit a wall, or they stop when they get paid. Get me the director of the FBI on the phone. I want to discuss jurisdictional overreach. At that moment, the heavy oak doors of the governor's office didn't just open. They were thrown wide. Harlan Voss walked in, wearing a fresh suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, looking every bit the federal hammer he was. Behind him was Agent Ellison and a team of forensic accountants who were already setting up laptops on the antique conference table. "You have an appointment?" Whitaker asked, feigning amusement. He didn't stand up. "I have a warrant," Harlan said, tossing a thick stack of papers onto the governor's desk. It landed with a heavy thud, knocking over a picture frame. Search and seizure, electronic devices, physical files, and the contents of that safe behind the portrait of Andrew Jackson. Whitaker's eye twitched. "You're out of your depth, Agent. This is the governor's mansion. You can't just waltz in here based on the rantings of a small-town judge." "Hale didn't rant," Harlan said, walking around the desk. He leaned in close, invading the governor's personal space. He sang like a canary. He told us about the Elysium Project. The color drained from Whitaker's face. The Elysium Project was the dirty secret that tied it all together. It wasn't just about speeding tickets. The traffic stops and false drug charges were designed to target landowners, specifically poor minority families who owned prime real estate along the bayou. The police would arrest the fathers, the judges would set exorbitant bails, and the families would be forced to sell their land for pennies on the dollar to pay the legal fees. Once the land was sold, it was bought by a shell company owned by Whitaker's donors, destined to become a luxury golf resort. "I don't know what you're talking about," Whitaker lied, though his heart rate was visible in the vein pulsing in his neck. "We know you do," Ellison interjected, stepping forward. "We track the wire transfers. Lang's consulting fees came directly from your campaign fund. And the land deeds, they were notarized by your wife's law firm." Whitaker stood up, buttoning his jacket to regain some dignity. "This is a witch hunt. I will have your badges. I will have your pensions. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Harlan said. "You're a man who destroys lives to build golf courses. You're a man who let innocent teenagers rot in prison so you could buy a third vacation home." Harlan turned to the window, looking out at the manicured lawn. "You know the funny thing, Governor? When I was in that cell waiting for your judge to ruin my life, I met a kid, 19 years old. His name was Jordan. He was in there because he resisted arrest while walking home from work. He lost his scholarship. He lost his job. His mother had to sell her house to pay his bail." Harlan turned back, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying intensity. "Jordan's house is on the blueprint for your new clubhouse. That's not a coincidence. That's a strategy, and it ends today." Whitaker sneered. "You have circumstantial evidence. You have the word of a corrupt judge trying to save his own skin. You need hard proof to indict a sitting governor." "We have the proof," Harlan said softly. "Lydia." The chief of staff froze. She looked at the governor, then at Harlan. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Harlan," Lydia whispered. "I can't go to prison for you. I have kids." Whitaker looked at her in horror. "What did you do?" "She gave us the server access codes," Ellison said, holding up a heavily encrypted hard drive. "We have the emails. We have the recordings of you ordering Hale to crush specific landowners. We have the audio of you laughing about how easy it was to steal their heritage." Harlan walked over to the safe behind the painting. He didn't need the combination. Lydia had already written it down for him. He spun the dial left, right, left. Click. The door swung open. Inside weren't just stacks of cash, but a black ledger. "The red ledger," Harlan said, picking it up. "Lang mentioned this. He said if he went down, he wanted you to go down harder." Whitaker slumped into his chair, a defeated man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of someone realizing their legacy was about to be incinerated. "You can't arrest me here," Whitaker whispered. "The optics, it will cause a riot." "The riot is already happening, Governor," Harlan said, gesturing to the television. On the screen, thousands of people were gathering outside the mansion gates. They weren't violent, but they were loud. They held signs with the names of the people Whitaker and his cronies had incarcerated. They were chanting for justice. "They're not here to riot," Harlan said. "They're here to witness." Harlan pulled out his handcuffs. They were standard-issue steel and cold, just like the ones Holt had put on him. "Turn around, Governor," Harlan ordered. "Please," Whitaker begged, his voice breaking. "Let me resign. Let me leave quietly. I'll go to a non-extradition country. Just don't walk me out there in cuffs." You didn't give Jordan a choice, Harlan said, his voice void of sympathy. You didn't give the grandmother in the courtroom a choice. You don't get special treatment just because your suit costs more than their houses. Harlan spun the governor around and snapped the cuffs on. Governor Harlan Whitaker, you are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. As they marched the governor out of his office, down the grand staircase, and toward the front doors, the staff watched in silence. No one tried to stop them. The spell of fear that Whitaker had cast over the state was broken. But as Harlan reached for the door handle, his phone buzzed. It was a text from a secure line. Subject, language. Location, county jail. Status, critical. Trap set. Harlan stopped. He looked at Ellison. Lang is in trouble. Someone got to the jail. Why do we care? Ellison asked. Because, Harlan said, looking at the terrified governor, Whitaker isn't the top. He's just the middleman. The money for the Elysium project came from somewhere else. And Lang knows who the real bankroll is. If Lang dies, the money trail dies with him. Harlan looked at the governor. You're coming with us. We're taking a detour. The county jail was a fortress of concrete and misery located outside of town in the middle of the swamp. It was designed to keep people in, but right now it was a killing jar. Harlan drove the SUV, lights and sirens blazing, cutting through the humid night air. In the back, Agent Ellison had Governor Whitaker handcuffed to the door handle. Whitaker looked nauseous. Who are you afraid of? Harlan demanded, glancing in the rearview mirror. Lang is going to be hit. Who ordered it? You're in custody, so it wasn't you? So. Whitaker stayed silent, staring out the window. If Lang dies, Harlan warned, you lose your only leverage for a plea deal. You'll die in federal prison. But if you tell me who the money man is, maybe, just maybe, you get a cell with a window. Whitaker swallowed hard. You don't understand, Agent Voss. These people, they aren't politicians. They're investors, the syndicate. They don't have voters, they have cleaners. A name, Harlan barked. Julian Sarago, Whitaker whispered. Ellison gasped. Julian Sarago, the shipping magnate? He's untouchable. He donates to the FBI Widows Fund. He also uses the shipping lanes to move human cargo, Harlan said grimly. And apparently he's building resorts to launder the money. They screeched into the prison parking lot. It was too quiet. The guard tower was dark. The gate was open. Stay here with the package, Harlan told Ellison, tossing her the keys. Call SWAT. I'm going in. Harlan, it's a setup, Ellison warned. You're walking into a slaughterhouse. Lang is the key, Harlan said, checking his service weapon. I'm not letting the truth die tonight. Harlan moved toward the prison entrance. The front doors were unlocked. Inside, the reception guard was unconscious, zip-tied to his chair. Harlan checked his pulse. Strong. He was alive, just incapacitated. Harlan moved silently through the hallways. The security cameras had been spray-painted black. The syndicate knew what they were doing. He reached the cell block where high-profile inmates were kept. He heard the sounds of a struggle, shouts, the clang of metal on metal, and the terrified screams of a man begging for his life. Harlan kicked the door to the cell block open. In the center of the common area, 3 inmates armed with shanks were circling a cowering figure in an orange jumpsuit. It was Lang. The former prosecutor was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, holding a plastic food tray as a shield. Finish him! A voice shouted from the upper tier. It was a guard, a corrupt one on Sarago's payroll. One of the inmates lunged. Harlan didn't hesitate. He fired 2 shots into the ceiling. The deafening boom echoed in the concrete chamber, freezing everyone in place. FBI! Harlan roared, his voice filling the space. Drop the weapons, now! The inmates looked at Harlan. They saw one man. They looked at each other. They smiled. 3 against 1. Get him too! The corrupt guard yelled from the balcony. Sarago pays double for a fed. The inmates charged. Harlan didn't shoot to kill. He needed answers, and a bloodbath would only bury the truth. He holstered his gun and met the charge with hand-to-hand combat skills honed by years of undercover work. The first inmate swung a sharpened toothbrush. Harlan sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, and used the attacker's momentum to flip him onto the concrete floor. The man groaned and didn't get up. The second inmate, a massive man with tattoos covering his face, tackled Harlan. They hit the ground hard. Harlan felt hands closing around his throat. He gasped for air, his vision swimming. You shouldn't have come back, boy, the inmate snarled. Harlan reached for his belt, pulling out his collapsible baton. He flicked his wrist, the metal expanding with a snick. He drove the end of the baton into the inmate's solar plexus. The grip on his throat loosened instantly. Harlan rolled free, getting to his feet just as the third inmate swung a heavy mop handle at his head. Harlan ducked. The wood splintered against the wall. He swept the man's legs, bringing him down, and delivered a swift kick to the ribs to keep him down. Silence returned to the cell block, save for the heavy breathing of the combatants. Harlan stood over this groaning man, straightening his tie. He looked up at the balcony where the corrupt guard was standing, mouth agape. "You want to come down here?" Harlan asked calmly. "Or should I come up there?" The guard dropped his weapon and raised his hands. "I surrender. Don't hurt me." Harlan turned to Lang. The former prosecutor was shaking, huddled in the corner in a pool of his own urine. He looked pathetic. This was the man who had strutted around the courtroom like a king just days earlier. "Get up, Lang," Harlan said, offering a hand. Lang looked at the hand, then at Harlan's face. He burst into tears. You saved me. After everything I did to you, you saved me." "I didn't save you," Harlan said, pulling him up. "I saved the witness. You're going to testify against Sarago. You're going to tell a federal grand jury everything." "I will," Lang sobbed. "I'll tell them everything. I kept files, secret files, in case Sarago turned on me. I have them." "Where?" Harlan asked. "My boat," Lang stammered. "The Lady Justice. It's docked at the marina. The files are welded inside the hull." Harlan cuffed Lang for his own protection this time and led him toward the exit. "Why?" Lang asked as they walked past the unconscious hitmen. "Why didn't you just let them kill me? It would have been justice." Harlan stopped. He looked at Lang. "That's the difference between you and me, Lang. You think justice is about hurting people you don't like. I think justice is about the truth. And the truth is, killing you lets the big fish swim free. I don't want revenge. I want change." They emerged into the night air. Sirens were wailing in the distance. Ellison's backup was arriving. As the SWAT team swarmed the facility, securing the corrupt guard and the hitmen, Harlan leaned against the hood of his SUV. He was bruised, exhausted, and his suit was ruined. Ellison walked over. "You look like hell." "I feel like it," Harlan admitted. "But we got him. Lang is flipping. And Sarago, we have the location of the evidence." "But Sarago isn't going to wait for us to come get it," Ellison said. "He's going to try to run." "Then we have to move fast," Harlan said. "The marina is a short drive away." Harlan looked at the governor, who was still cuffed in the back seat, staring wide-eyed at the chaos. "You see this, Whitaker?" Harlan said through the open window. "This is what happens when you sell your soul. The devil comes to collect." Harlan got into the driver's seat. "One more stop, Ellison. Let's go get the nail for the coffin." The engine roared to life. The final showdown wasn't going to be in a courtroom or a mansion. It was going to be on the water in the dark against a man with billions of dollars and a private army. But Harlan Voss had something money couldn't buy. He had momentum. And for the first time in a long time, the scales of justice were tipping in the right direction. The Pelican Bay Marina was shrouded in mist when the FBI convoy arrived, their sirens silenced to maintain the element of surprise. At the end of the longest pier, a massive superyacht, the Leviathan, was preparing to cast off. This was Julian Sarago's escape route into international waters. Harlan didn't wait for the tactical team to set up a perimeter. He sprinted down the wooden dock, his weapon drawn, the sound of his footsteps masked by the churning diesel engines of the yacht. Ellison was right behind him. "Cut the engines!" Harlan screamed, aiming his service weapon at the bridge. Sarago's private security detail, 2 men in dark suits, appeared on the deck. They raised their submachine guns, but before they could fire, red laser dots danced across their chests. The FBI SWAT team had taken positions on the adjacent boats. "Drop them," Ellison ordered through a megaphone. "Federal agents, you are surrounded." The guards hesitated, looked at the overwhelming firepower aimed at them, and slowly placed their weapons on the deck. Harlan leaped onto the yacht, kicking open the door to the main cabin. Inside, Julian Sarago was frantically shredding documents, a glass of scotch trembling in his hand. He looked up, his face a mask of aristocratic disdain that was quickly crumbling into fear. "You're making a mistake," Sarago hissed. "I have the president on speed dial." "You can call him," Harlan said, holstering his gun and pulling out the handcuffs. "But I don't think he takes collect calls from federal prison." "You have nothing," Sarago spat. "Lang is a liar. Whitaker is a fool. You have no physical proof linking me to the zoning scams." "Actually," Harlan said, pointing out the porthole to a smaller, modest boat docked nearby, the Lady Justice, "we just cut the hull of Lang's fishing boat open. We found the hard drives, we found the wire transfer receipts, and we found the hit list with my name on it." Sarago slumped against the mahogany desk. The game was over. The billionaire who had treated the entire state like his personal monopoly board was finally bankrupt of options. Months later, the parish courthouse looked very different. The air conditioning had been fixed, the walls were freshly painted, but the biggest change was in the jury box. It wasn't filled with hand-picked cronies anymore. It was filled with a diverse group of citizens who looked attentive and fair. On the bench sat a new federal judge brought in from out of state to oversee the clean sweep trials. Harlan sat in the back row watching the proceedings. He wasn't in cuffs this time. He was wearing his badge openly. In the matter of the People versus Harlan Whitaker, Julian Sarago, and Quentin Holt, the judge announced, the jury has reached a verdict. Holt, looking gaunt and terrified, wept openly as the foreman read guilty on all counts. He received 15 years. Governor Whitaker, stripped of his suits and his power, stared at the floor as he was sentenced to 25 years for racketeering. And Julian Sarago, the untouchable moneyman, was given 3 consecutive life sentences for ordering the hits on witnesses and federal agents. His assets were seized, billions of dollars that would go into a restitution fund for the families he had displaced. But the sweetest moment for Harlan wasn't the sentencing. It was what happened afterward. He walked outside into the bright Louisiana sunshine. Jordan, the young man whose life had been ruined by a fake arrest, was waiting for him. Jordan was smiling, holding a piece of paper. "They expunged my record, Harlan," Jordan said, shaking his hand. "And they gave my mom the deed to her land back plus interest." "You going back to school?" Harlan asked. "Next semester," Jordan nodded. "Pre-law, I think I want to be a prosecutor, but a real one. Like you." Harlan smiled. "We need good ones, kid." Agent Ellison walked up, handing Harlan a coffee. "Nice work, Voss. Headquarters wants you back in Washington. There's a Senate subcommittee that needs investigating." Harlan looked back at the courthouse. The statue of Lady Justice in the square seemed to stand a little taller today. "I'm ready," Harlan said. "Let's go." As they drove away, the radio played a news clip about the historic corruption bust. The narrator called it a miracle. Harlan knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was just what happened when good people stopped being afraid and started fighting back. Karma had arrived, and it had brought a badge. That is the story of how one man stood up against a corrupt system and brought an entire criminal empire to its knees. It's a reminder that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, whether they are a police officer, a governor, or a billionaire, no one is above the law. Harlan Voss didn't just fight for himself. He fought for Jordan, for the grandmother in the gallery, and for every person who has ever been bullied by someone with a badge. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to share this video with your friends. And make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. What would you do if you were in Harlan's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.